You like your shortbreads, Alejandro?
Yeah.
How can you eat all that stuff and not get fat? That's what I want to know.
Yeah, it's. I don't know if it is the pheromones or the hormones or whatever, the testosterone or something. Maybe when I'm 40,
Yeah.
I'm very fat.
I know. I think maybe like you say, your metabolism when you're young.
Yeah.
I know.
I mean, like I do a lot of sport, but I'm sure my metabolism has something to do with it. Yeah. So, hello. Finally, I managed to make a video about Gaelic. I wanted to find the right person, and here is my friend Morag. She's from Scotland, and we met when I was 12 years old.
A long time ago.
A long time ago.
Sata van Oorshin, as they say in Gaelic.
How?
Sata van Oorshin.
And what would be the translation for that exactly?
It was a long time ago.
A long time ago, yeah. And you are a teacher of Gaelic now.
Yes, I teach Gaelic online, and that started becoming more of an interest for me in lockdown. I began to work more and more with students online, and it's something I really enjoy, and it's fun. So yeah, my interest in Gaelic developed from my interest in hill walking. So a lot of the names of the Scottish hills are in Gaelic.
Okay.
And then I started doing a bit of Gaelic singing, and from there I decided I wanted to learn the language.
Wow. So you didn't, like, your family did not speak Gaelic? It was something you decided to learn?
The last person in my family who was a native Gaelic speaker was my great-grandfather, but he had died before I was born, so there wasn't anyone in my family who could speak Gaelic. But I do remember when we were small, my father teaching us a very simple Gaelic song. He didn't speak Gaelic either, but there's one Gaelic song that's so simple that non-Gaelic speakers can learn it very easily. So we would sing that while we were washing the dishes. And my father was interested in connecting with his ancestry, so we used to visit the glen where his grandfather was from. But I'm the only one in the family that's ever made any attempt to learn the language.
Okay.
My brother and sister aren't interested at all. But for me, it's been quite important.
Because there is a huge Scottish identity thing in the idea of learning and speaking actively Gaelic.
I think so. Since I suppose in the last few years, since there was the independence referendum in 2014, which we did not, although there was a strong movement for independence, we did not get enough votes for Scotland to become independent. But I would say that for some people, learning Gaelic is about, I don't know, wanting to learn a language that has been around in Scotland for 1500 years and was at one point in the 12th century the language of the court. Scotland and was spoken widely throughout Scotland, not in all areas, but it was one of Scotland's significant languages at that point, and over the centuries its influence has gradually decreased. But for me, I think because it's been more recent in my ancestry, I feel I have a connection with the land and with the language, and it's been very important to me to understand where I've come from, where my people have come from on my father's side. And as it's an indigenous language in common with many other indigenous languages around the globe, there's a strong connection between the Gaelic language and the land. So the language has a much different connection to nature than, say, English does. It's a different worldview when you're looking at the world through the lens of Gaelic. It's not a colonial worldview, which, because I grew up speaking English, I didn't really think of it in a comparative way.
Mm-hmm.
But having learned Gaelic and also have some slight knowledge of Lakota, one of the indigenous languages of the Native Americans, I recognise that indigenous languages have a connection with the land, and you know, the Lakota language with spirituality. You know, the lens of a people's philosophy and way of life comes through in their language. So reviewing English in a new light, I now see that English is the language of English. It reflects the colonial way in which English speakers have behaved over the last few generations. I mean, let me give you an example. In Gaelic, there's no sense of ownership. Things are at you. So if I want to say, I have a book, it'd be Halior Akam, a book is at me. My book is on the table. Ha and Lior Akam Eraforged. The book at me is on the table. So that's one example of how learning Gaelic has changed my perception of the whole kind of ownership thing. I would say Gaelic also is a language that is much richer in terms of describing scenery, the landscape. So in English, if you're describing high points in the landscape, we've got the word hill or mountain. But in Gaelic, there are numerous words which not only talk about the height of a hill or a mountain, but the shape of it. So you've got a stook would be pointed. I think mulach is a kind of rounded point. A tor would be kind of slight, rounded. So the words are very descriptive of the topography of the landscape, and the colours are different to English colours that are more of a palette. So glass can mean grey, or it can mean green, or it can mean grey-green. So in nature, the colours are a wider spectrum. So to me, it reflects the fact that the Gaels were a people that lived in very close harmony with the land. They knew the land and the sea intimately.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. I find it, for example, that usually ancient languages or languages that have preserved ancient characteristics have quite more relationship with the land. Like, for example, I find it in Latin, there is a huge vocabulary that now is lost in all the Romance languages. It's totally lost. Huge vocabulary concerning, for example, names of animals, of places relating, for example, the landscape, names of the plants, the colors also in Latin works very differently. And also in ancient Greek, in comparison with modern Greek, you notice a huge backdrop in terms of the amount of vocabulary devoted to describing natural elements. And it is and I noticed that in Latin, in comparison with modern Spanish, and I noticed that especially with the colors and certain other things, also in ancient Greek and modern Greek, you notice that something has been lost, so to say. And it would be interesting, for example, to see, I mean, how much has, I don't know if you know this, how much has the language evolved, because I guess it hasn't evolved much since maybe the last 500 years, maybe more or less must have stayed the same, because English has changed a lot, because it's socially has been, the British Empire has extended for all over the world, but Scottish was spoken in a small and in a place that was confined, so to say. It didn't grow as English language.
Oh, I think all languages evolve over time. So there was a big exodus from Scotland in the late 18th century, early 19th century, a period known in history as the clearances, when many people emigrated from Scotland, particularly the Highlands, because of land issues. Either they were cleared forcibly from the land, or they emigrated because of poverty. So there was significant emigration from Scotland to Nova Scotia in Canada, Cape Breton. And what happened there was that people kept their Gaelic language, and interestingly, I think the language there is different from the Gaelic language here. So whereas the Gaelic language in Scotland was kind of adapting and changing, I think in Cape Breton they would speak a kind of older style.
So there is apart from Scotland, Scottish Gaelic is spoken also in Nova Scotia.
Yep, just as Gaelic has been declining in Scotland, so it has been declining in Nova Scotia. So in both countries there are significant attempts to revive the language. And I think it's in common with a lot of minority languages because of the prevalence of the media. Indigenous languages or minority languages are struggling to survive, so they have to make a concerted effort to combat the pervasive influence of English, because it's everywhere on the TV and social media and music. So that's the problem, I think, since the 1970s, when television came into the homes of Gaelic speaking people, the language started to decline.
How many? What is the state of the language right now in Scotland? I mean, how many native speakers are left? How do you often hear actually people speaking in Gaelic? How's the situation?
Okay, well, we don't actually know how many Gaelic speakers are left. What happens is every 10 years the Scottish Government carries out a census, a survey of the population, and part of the questions that are asked concern the Gaelic language. So, in fact, the last census results that we have were from 2011. So, actually, just this year, just this last month or two, we have had to fill out another census. So the results are not yet known. But there were 4 questions connected with Gaelic. So people had to ask, if you were over 18 and resident in Scotland, you had to fill out this form, and the questions relating to Gaelic were, do you speak the language, the Gaelic language? Do you read the Gaelic language? Do you understand the Gaelic language? What have I missed out? Read, write, you read, write, understand and speak the Gaelic language. So you could either answer yes or no. So there's no way of knowing when someone answers yes. It could be they've just started learning a course, an evening class for a few weeks, or it could be that they've spoken it all their life. So we do not actually know how many native speakers are left, but the last census in 2011, I think 58,000 people said they could speak Gaelic, but that's not necessarily native speakers. What is known is that the language is in decline, and a few years ago there was a document published by some academic researchers entitled The Crisis of Gaelic in the Vernacular Communities. So these researchers were discovering that in traditional Gaelic speaking communities, and by that we tend to mean the Outer Hebrides, so the island of Lewis, Uist, parts of Skye that were considered strongholds of the Gaelic language. What these researchers found was that in a lot of cases Gaelic was not being spoken in the home, and that intergenerational transmission was not happening, and they reckoned that if change wasn't to come about, then their prediction is that Gaelic as a community language would be dead within a generation.
Wow, within a generation.
Yep. So, I mean, other people would say, oh, look, Gaelic's in a very healthy situation. Since 2005, it's had the status of an official language. There's millions of pounds given by the Scottish Government to the Gaelic Language Board, who disperse it to different organisations, to the BBC Alba, the Gaelic broadcasting service, which has been broadcasting in Gaelic since or Gaelic television programme since 2008. There's a Gaelic radio station. There's the language learning app Duolingo has had a Scottish Gaelic course since 2019, and since then I think the figures now are up to about almost 1 million learners around the world are using the Gaelic learning app. So some people would say, oh look, these are healthy signs, but someone who does a few hours of Duolingo a month, learning to recognise words and spelling it is not, that doesn't make you a speaker of the language. And I think with every generation that passes, the richness of the language is going, because unless you're a native speaker hearing it within the context of a community, you are not going to have the richness of the vocabulary. And as we've spoken about, the sort of decline of people living on the land and using vocabulary connected with the land, with agriculture, with fishing, but it's like every year, expressions, local expressions, idioms, are just going out of use. So they'll be collected in dictionaries or on sound files someone's made in an online dictionary, but that is not the same as a living, vibrant language.
We have a problem, for example, in Spain. We have a language which is the Fabla, which is a kind of mix between Spanish and Portuguese. It's spoken right in the frontier between Portugal and Spain, so it's quite a very thin language, so to say. It's spoken just in the frontier. And I saw some interviews, and the problem was not only that the language was not spoken anymore by the younger generations, but that the work people traditionally do in the land was not carried on. So that was also part of the problem, because you use the vocabulary when you work in the land, and you use it's not just words, because words, as you said, like you can keep it in a dictionary. The thing is that you need to keep doing these jobs, these traditional, these activities.
So if you look at the new words that are coming into Gaelic language, as in a lot of languages, they're words connected with technology, technolos, computer. Often they're just English words with a Gaelic spelling. So and I think around the globe, languages, or especially indigenous languages, are noticing that people are moving away from a connection with the land, with nature. And my personal view is that is contributing to an increase in poor mental health in young people. I've worked a lot with young people, and there's a recognition that a lot of young people now are not connected with nature. They spend a lot of time indoors in front of a screen. And I just think, for myself, in lockdown I felt lucky to be able to have a garden where I could feed the birds and watch them feeding, be out in nature. That gave me joy and pleasure. And but I think for young people that are growing up not even knowing the names of plants or flowers or animals, or a lot of young people don't even know, they might eat meat, but they wouldn't know that pork chops come from a pig, or they just know nothing. They no connection with the land in a way that past generations would have found unthinkable. But there's less and less people involved in agriculture, and more people involved in jobs where it's just like technology and no connection with the natural world. So but the language reflects our realities, I guess.